Okay, let's talk about left hand, or if you will, slide hand technique. Okay, so just like all the other techniques that we've gone through before, we want to break this down to specifics. Okay, if we're looking at the left and right hand and you're trying to just jump into a solo right away, you're going to find that slide is very, very frustrating. Okay, because there are some things to know, and we want to break them down. Okay, so let's talk about specifically what we need to think about in regards to the left hand. Then we'll get to the right hand later. Typically, when you're using a slide, you're going to be putting it either on the third or fourth finger, so either your ring or your pinky. And this is really and truly a preference type of thing. You'll see great players using them on either finger. I've even seen players use them on their second and first fingers. I would probably not suggest that as much. Here's some reasons why you might want to use the third finger and reasons why you might want to use the fourth finger. If you're using the third finger, it's going to allow you to stretch much further. So to play certain chords, you would be able to have more reach with your pinky. So say if I was doing some lick and I wanted to now I probably wouldn't do such a thing. I'd play a whole solo with just the slide. But if I wanted to reach, I could do that with the pinky, and that allows you to do that, to such, okay? If we're using the pinky, you're going to be able to grab a lot more open chords, and you're going to have the ability to do more noodling, if you will, because your third finger is a lot stronger than your pinky, and it's a lot more accessible, at least by size. So if you wanted to do a lot more open type stuff, then you have your third finger that you would want to have free, and you'd put the slide on your pinky. Really, this comes down to preference. You're probably going to put the slide on one of these fingers and it's going to feel more natural. I would go with that finger. I don't recommend any particular way here. This is the way that I've gotten used to it. So it's the way that I still do it. Every now and then I'll use my pinky if I have a specific application that I just can't use the slide on my third finger. Okay, so now let's talk about what's happening left-hand wise and some things that we need to think about. So let's go back for a minute and talk about some basic technical theory about what's happening with the guitar when we're fretting a note. When we're fretting a note, we're playing it somewhere in between two frets. Now, one of the first videos that I did there, I told you want to get as close to the fret as possible, and that's going to help with strength and that sort of thing. But ultimately, if we were pressing hard enough, we could be anywhere in this area, and the area where the string meets the fret is the actual place where the pitch is determined. So we don't have to think too much when we're playing through a scale about accuracy of where we're putting our fingers. Whereas a violinist or somebody who had a fretless instrument would have to think a little bit more about the specific place on the fret that they're playing. Okay? Now, when we're using a slide, we have to think differently because the difference between playing directly over the fret and playing, say, halfway down the fret is a huge amount. If you wanted to get specific, each fret or each half step is divided by 100 cents or 100% of a specific of a half step. Okay, so from here at the top of the fret to halfway down would be a difference of 50 cents or 50%. Okay, and so obviously you have a huge variation in between that one fret. So that means we have to get very specific as to where this slide goes. So we want to be directly over the fret, and this is the number one thing that folks do wrong when they're playing slide, is they're a little bit sharp or they're a little bit flat. And anything that you play, I don't care if your technique is perfect as far as left and right hand technique and the way that you're approaching the slide on the strings, if your intonation is bad, it's just going to sound bad. It doesn't matter what you're doing. So intonation is the number one thing when it comes to slide that you should be knowledgeable of and wary of when you're playing. This takes a bit of getting used to because we're not used to being so concerned with looking directly over the fret and making sure we're right over it. Okay, so case in point here, if I wanted to play this 5th fret of the 2nd string, I'm going to be playing directly over it, just like this, and not flat or sharp of it. It's directly over it, so that's going to take a little getting used to. I'm going to have some exercises that I'm going to show you a little bit later on that's going to make this technique develop in you and in your hands, okay? Okay, so number 1, playing over the fret. Another really important thing to do is we need to have a muting finger, okay? So when we're playing slide, if we don't have a finger that mutes, then we might get this sound. Sounds not so good, right? It's like we can hear the notes there, but there's a lot of sloshiness, there's a lot of something else going on. What's going on? Well, when you start playing slide, you're going to run into this and you're going to swear that you're doing the right thing, but it still sounds like what I just did. The reason being is that when we agitate the string by picking it and we have the slide moving, we're hearing mainly this portion of the string vibrating because that's what we're hitting, and it's vibrating mainly on this side, but we're also getting this portion of the string back here. And so that's fighting what you're doing on this end. So what do we do about that? Well, we have to mute that part of the string. And so one way that we can do that, and the main way that we're going to do that here, is with our 2nd finger if you're playing with the slide on the 3rd finger. Okay? If you're playing with the slide on the 4th finger, then you're going to use your 3rd finger as the mute. Okay? So what you're going to do is take that 2nd finger and lay it on the strings. Every single time that the slide is touching the string, your mute finger will be laying right alongside of it as if it's attached. Okay, it's always going to be there because that's going to give you a much cleaner sound. Okay, so the finger's muting the whole time. I'm not getting that scratchy sound. That's the other thing that's really important when you're playing slide. And thirdly, you want to make sure that you've got the slide perpendicular to the strings, okay? Or, I should say, parallel to the frets. Basically, if your frets are going straight up and down, you don't want to have the slide at an angle like this. Reason being is, if you're hitting 2 notes at once, they're going to be slightly out of tune, as opposed to being like that. You're going to get that kind of sound. So you do not want to be playing sideways, and it's going to give you also an inaccurate idea of where you're at on the fret, because you're kind of all over the fret here. Here you're directly above it. So this technique does take some time. You have to hold your hand straighter than you would if you were doing, say, like a relaxed open chords type of feel. Okay, so the 3 basic things to remember in regards to the left hand is make sure you're directly over the fret and not a little bit behind it or a little bit above it. Make sure that you're not holding the slide at an angle, otherwise you're going to get incorrect intonation. And then make sure you're using your muting finger, because if not, you're going to get that really scratchy sound that you can hear like in early recordings of slide players before they really started honing in on that technique. So remember those 3 things, and let's keep going with some right hand technique.